It's such a joy and honor to be back with you all today, even virtually. I do have a house full of pets, as Liz mentioned, so I'm going to hope and set the intention that they will not interrupt us too many times today. But it's really such an honor. It's always so wonderful to be with you all, and especially on Martin Luther King weekend. I was so inspired by the story Liz shared about the struggles he overcame to become the social justice hero who has inspired us all. So this morning, I want to reflect on the struggles we might need to overcome in order to set our resolutions and intentions for the new year ahead. When I think about making changes, I think about a friend I have who's a therapist. She's a warm, compassionate woman with a true gift for helping people. She also loves to exercise. She works out religiously. So one day we were talking about people's ability to make changes in their lives, and she said, I don't get it. My clients keep saying that they want to exercise more, and I say, great, go do that. I don't understand why they don't just do that. I don't remember what my response was at the time, but I'm fairly sure I had to pick my jaw up off the floor because I understand why they don't just do that. I resolved to start a daily yoga practice every January. For so many years, I've lost count. Every time I put it back on my list of resolutions with a mixture of guilt, longing, determination, and by February, I've usually given up. There are times I think I should just adopt the philosophy of the author Aleister Crowley, who once said, "May the new year bring you courage to break your resolutions early." My own plan is to swear off every kind of virtue so that I triumph even when I fail. On a side note, Crowley was dubbed the wickedest man of his time, so his plan actually worked out quite well. As much as I know from experience that change is hard, and as tempting as it is to adopt Crowley's forget it mentality, I still have the deepest belief that change is possible. In fact, I've spent my entire life searching for the answer to the question, what makes change possible? Because I've watched so many of the people I love suffer inside a prison of their own making. Whether it was my own mom carrying on the tradition of constant criticism that her mother and grandmother passed down, or my best friend who I lost to an accidental drug overdose at a young age, or a beloved relative who's packed every room in her house to the ceiling with stuff, but she can't let anything go. In my quest to understand how people are able to make change, the most painful and yet most important lesson I've learned is that we can't make people change. We can only change ourselves and offer support to others. We've heard this all a million times, of course, but it's still not easy to let go when someone we fiercely love is at stake. When it comes to changing ourselves, thankfully, there are many sources of hope. One source of hope for me is that we are starting to question the concept of willpower. For so long, we've lived with the idea that making the right choice is just a matter of strength and determination. So if you eat that extra cookie or smoke that cigarette or lose your temper with your kids again, you just aren't strong enough. So now, on top of making a choice that you were frustrated with, you get to beat yourself up for being weak. But thanks to an explosion of scientific research, we're learning that traditional notions of willpower don't always hold true. In fact, what we struggle with and our ability to make change is impacted by a complex combination of factors, such as genetics, health, upbringing, our physical environment, our social supports, our culture, even our language. Just a quick look at the self-help aisle of a bookstore or the titles of TED Talks can give you a sense of all the tricks and tips and insights that we have to help us make healthy changes in light of this new research. For instance, studies have shown that through small daily choices, we can train our brain to focus on possibility instead of fear. And this strategy works for other kinds of change too. Rather than focusing on one big change, for example, research is finding that it's more effective to start with smaller, easier changes and then work your way up. So you're effectively training yourself to trust yourself. All this new insight is exciting, but of course, it isn't the whole story. There are times for many of us when we have every resource and support possible, and yet we still can't seem to make the changes we desperately want to make. This is when a concept called radical acceptance can help. Radical acceptance is a term coined by the psychologist and meditation teacher Tara Brach. She defines it as clearly recognizing what is happening inside us and regarding what we see with an open, loving heart. It's based on the Buddhist idea that insight and compassion are like two wings of a bird. We need both in order to fly. The influential psychologist Carl Rogers promoted a similar idea in his lifetime. He once said, "Over the years, I have learned to become more adequate in listening to myself, so that now I know somewhat more than I used to what I'm feeling in any given moment." One way of putting this is that I feel I have become more adequate in letting myself be what I am. It becomes easier for me to accept myself as a decidedly imperfect person. This must seem to some like a very strange direction in which to move, but it seems to me to have value, because the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. So how do we accept ourselves as we are in a way that allows us to change? Let's look first at the wing of insight. We can cultivate insight by simply pausing and reflecting on what's happening inside us. Ideally, this pause comes in the form of a few deep breaths and a moment to look within in the midst of a hard situation. But sometimes it means reflecting back on a situation after it's already happened. No matter when we do it, it's important to adopt an attitude of gentle inquiry. So instead of saying to ourselves, "Why the insert favorite expletive? Did I just do that again?" We can say something more like, "That was a hard situation. I wonder what feeling most needed my attention at that moment. What need was I trying to meet? What could I do differently next time?" The more we understand how our thoughts, feelings, needs, fears, and beliefs are impacting us, the better we are at working with them and moving past them. Even just the act of naming our struggle often weakens its grip on us. Of course, facing our struggles squarely and looking at ourselves isn't always easy. Perhaps that's why it's a common theme in literature and spiritual texts. Jacob wrestles all night with God in the form of a stranger. Jesus spends 40 days alone in the wilderness, facing temptations sent by the devil. The Buddha is put to the test by Mara as he sits under the Bodhi tree. Harry Potter must go within himself in order to battle Voldemort. These stories remind us again and again that we can't triumph over evil unless we're willing to dig deep within ourselves first. Luckily, most of us don't have to face off with the devil. But sometimes we're afraid to go under the surface of our lives because we might come face to face with a different kind of demon. Demons in the form of feelings like shame or unworthiness that seem capable of tearing us apart. And it's true that if we're struggling with something like trauma or depression, we have to move slowly and carefully and use the help of professionals and support systems so that we don't cause more hurt. But when we can come face to face with what's happening inside of us, not only do we realize that we can survive it, we're also given a special gift. It's the gift of knowing that we're not our thoughts and feelings or behaviors. They're not the core of who we are. The core of who we are is a wise, open, compassionate, grounded self, the inherently worthy self that we talk about in the first Unitarian Universalist principle. We are not our anger or our anxiety or our depression or our destructive habits. They're merely parts of us trying to get our attention, signposts pointing to deep needs and fears that still need to be addressed. Instead of going to battle with them, we can stop and go within. And without that internal fight that shuts us down, or the dogs that are trying to get our attention, we can access the emotional and mental energy we need to heal old pain and practice new ways of responding. So I want to practice that by doing some meditation. First, I'm going to take a quick break so I can give my dogs a little treat so they can calm down a bit. So as you get settled, go ahead and kind of find a comforting place with it, and I will be right back. Thanks for your patience. uh, Hopefully you have a chance to kind of get settled. Maybe take a few deep breaths. If it's helpful for you to, turn your camera off if you feel like it, or you can close your eyes, soften your gaze. And I just want to say that this is going to be a guided meditation. And I know that guided meditations don't work for all people at all times. So if you'd like to do something different with this time, just know that you're welcome to do whatever you need most. But if you feel comfortable with the guided meditation, let's bring to mind a situation in your life where you want to make a change, but you're struggling. And if nothing comes to mind, you can pick any situation that's causing a negative reaction. Now, don't pick something that's too traumatic or overwhelming because you want to be able to stay present with it, but something that you feel like you might be able to work with right now. And as you bring the situation to mind, notice what feelings come up for you. What is it about the situation that provokes the strongest feelings? You might see a particular scene in your mind, hear words that are spoken, or recognize a belief you hold about how this situation reflects on you. Try to notice as you bring this to mind how your feelings are affecting your physical body. And pay special attention to any sensations you might have in your stomach, your chest, your throat. Just notice what's going on for a few moments. And now that we're in touch with this a little bit, let's first experiment with what it feels like to resist your experience. So we're going to try directing a mental stream of the word no at that feeling. Let that word carry the full energy of no, rejecting, pushing away what you're experiencing. And just notice what happens to your body and to your feelings as you say no to your experience. Now let's take a deep breath and let go of that no. And see if you can let go of any muscle tension you might have and bring some more calm and relaxation to your body. You can adjust your posture if you need to. And now let's bring the situation to mind again. And this time, we're going to try directing a stream of yes at the feeling. So see if you can feel into that yes, that openness, that acceptance. Yes to the struggle. Yes to the part of us that wants the struggle to go away. Let your feelings and thoughts float held in this open yes. If there are any waves of no, maybe feelings that come from thinking about the situation or from doing this exercise, just know that that's okay and let those reactions be received in the field of yes as well. As you continue to release your thoughts and feelings into the yes, notice what's happening in your body. Is there anything different happening with your muscles or your stomach, your chest, your jaw, your throat? Just notice whatever comes up. Let's just sit for a couple more breaths, releasing and resting in this relaxed, alert awareness. And let your intention be to say a gentle yes to whatever comes up. Now let us slowly return. You can reintroduce some slow movement into your body. Open your eyes if they were closed. And let's just return to this space together again. That's just a short practice, but hopefully a chance to see what it feels like when we resist versus when we practice radical acceptance. The Buddha once asked a student, if a person is struck by an arrow, is it painful? The student replied, it is. The Buddha then asked, if the person is struck by a second arrow, is that even more painful? And the student replied again, it is. The Buddha explained, in life, we cannot always control the first arrow, but the second arrow is our reaction to the first. And with the second arrow comes the possibility of choice. In her book, True Refuge, Brock uses this story to illustrate why we need the wing of self-compassion, in addition to the wing of insight, when we practice radical acceptance. She writes, the first arrow is our human conditioning to cling to comfort and pleasure and to react with anger or fear to unpleasant experiences. It's humbling to discover that willpower is often no match for these primal energies. We believe we should be able to control our emotions, then they just storm in and possess our psyches. The second, more painful arrow is our reaction to these quote unquote failures. Sometimes our aversion is subtle. We're not aware of how it undermines us. Yet often it is not. We hate ourselves for the way we get insecure and flustered, for being fatigued and unproductive, for our addiction to alcohol or other substances. Rather than attending to the difficult emotions underlying the first arrow, we shoot ourselves with the second arrow of self-blame. Many of us are well acquainted with the pain of that second arrow. We walk around with a voice in our heads that's constantly judging our every action. For some, the voice is quiet and nagging. For others, it's loud and cruel. We might find countless ways to numb out or distract ourselves to keep that voice in the background, but it's still there chattering away. Practicing self-compassion is a way of countering that critical voice with a different, kinder one. The self-compassion researcher Kristen Neff describes it as learning to treat ourselves the way we would treat our most beloved friend. It's a simple concept, but it isn't always easy. When some people learn about the practice, they respond that they don't need it because they don't have a cruel inner voice. In fact, they have the opposite problem. They're filled with feelings of superiority or excessive pride. But the excessive pride and self-aversion can actually be two sides of the same coin. Both come from not trusting our inner goodness. This is because pride is often built not on our inherent worthiness, but on things that are temporary. Our looks, our possessions, our success, even our physical and mental abilities, which can all be taken away with illness or age. If the things we built our sense of superiority on could crumble, then we have to constantly hustle for our worthiness, as the author Brené Brown puts it. Another reason people resist the practice of self-compassion is that our culture tells us we have to be hard on ourselves in order to create change. After all, if we practice self-compassion, aren't we just letting ourselves off the hook and allowing our problems to continue? On the surface, it makes sense, but the reality is that being hard on ourselves didn't work the first time, so doing more of the same isn't going to make it any better. Self-compassion breaks that cycle of mistake, shame, more mistakes, more shame. It frees us from that cycle so that we can take responsibility for our past mistakes and learn to respond differently in the future. I know when I first learned about the practice of self-compassion, I was very resistant to it. I figured it couldn't be applicable to me because I wasn't prideful, but I also didn't have a bad self-esteem. And besides, I was pretty sure I needed to push myself to fix my imperfections. Then I went through a painful divorce, and I found myself facing a dark night of the soul. I was deeply grieving the past and overwhelmed with anxiety about the future. I couldn't eat without feeling sick to my stomach. I burst into tears constantly, and I woke up in the middle of the night already mid-panic attack. Many of my friends were giving advice like, just stay positive, or they wanted to talk me out of my thoughts and feelings. It felt like I was coming apart at the seams. And on top of everything else, I was angry at myself for not being able to hold it all together. One day, my therapist was listening to me explain what was going on. And she said, I want you to imagine the part of you feeling grief and anxiety is driving a bus. You're already afraid she's going to crash the bus. So don't yell at her or criticize her or yank her out of the seat, because then she is definitely going to crash. Instead, speak calmly and compassionately to her. Tell her that you hear her, that you understand her fears, and that you know she wants to do what's best, that she's trying to help. Tell her you will keep listening to her, but for now, she needs to stop and rest. You will drive the bus. You will take care of her. This mental exercise was strange, to say the least, but the moment I had tried it, tears welled up in my eyes. Treating my fears and pain with such tenderness cracked something wide open in this place of spaciousness. I could move through my feelings instead of sinking down into them. I finally got it. When we practice self-compassion, we are throwing ourselves a life preserver, but we are also helping those around us. The more compassion we feel for ourselves, the more compassion we can feel for others. We avoid the trap of becoming self-loathing and then turning that pain outward against others. We see the dire consequences of pain turned outward every day in the news. For example, most perpetrators of mass shootings have a long history of struggling with shame and self-loathing. We can also probably think of a few public figures who are dealing with their self-loathing by grabbing for power and attention. Unfortunately, our world is full of reactivity, full of people who act from a place of pain or fear, which only perpetuates the cycle of violence and abuse. But we can make a different choice. We can choose the freedom that comes with practicing the wings of insight and self-compassion. We don't have to wait until January every year to get a fresh start. Each moment is an opportunity to pause, notice what's happening within us, and treat what we see with tenderness, a tenderness that is healing. Each moment is another chance to take a tiny step toward the life we want to lead. We will still mess up most of the time. Sometimes it will even feel like we're taking giant leaps backward instead of tiny steps forward. But there's always hope, because underneath it all, we are ultimately sacred, worthy, whole. The Indian master Bapuji urges us to remember this truth. He writes, "My beloved child, break your heart no longer. Each time you judge yourself, you break your own heart. You stop feeding on the love which is the wellspring of your vitality. The time has come, your time, to live, to celebrate. Let no one, no thing, or no ideal or idea or ideal obstruct you. If one comes, even in the name of truth, forgive it for its unknowing. Do not fight. Let go. Breathe into the goodness that you are. May it be so, and blessed be."